Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Gregory, how are we doing today?
Hey, we're doing great here. We spent our first weekend not in the hospital for
Oh,
about a month and a half. So, and actually got to go to the lake. My daughter and her husband have a new boat, and of course our new granddaughter, and it was a huge blast. We went and saw some waterfalls, all kinds of stuff.
oh man, I'm jealous. Can't wait for the pictures. More at 11. 11 newscast. Is that Greg? You didn't take any pictures? Oh man. All right.
I think I did.
Well, we
If
will.
if not, somebody did. I'll
Okay.
commandeer some pictures.
Please do send those this way, folks. Hopefully, y'all had as much of a nice weekend as Greg just had. You're in for a treat here today. So today, as always, this is Supply Chain Buzz, a live show that comes at you every Monday at 12 noon Eastern Time. As always, as Greg knows, and Jose and Josh and Donna all know, we're going
Oh,
to be discussing a variety of news and developments across global business. And we've got a big guest, Greg, a big repeat guest in Lee Klaskow with Bloomberg Intelligence. Greg, he's got a variety of nicknames, doesn't he?
yeah, tons of 'em. Logistics Lee.
Right.
I think his wife had made a good case for logistically, huh? And oh, so much more than logistics Lee,
That's right.
right? And then
That-
again, there's just Lee. And I think you mentioned like LK3000 or something like that,
That's right.
right?
That is right.
That's his rap name, right?
Well,
He's
hey,
going to join Outcast later.
that's right. Oh man, shaking it like a Polaroid. Lee is going to be back with us here in just a little bit to give us his take on four stories we're going to be walking through. Okay, including, kidding aside, including the latest with Yellow. So of course,
Yeah.
many of y'all saw the developments there over the weekend. But hey, we want to hear from you. So give us your take in the comments throughout the show. And Greg, if folks are listening to the podcast replay, which we usually drop on Fridays, what would you suggest they do?
Listen on Monday live. And also, of course, subscribe,
That's right.
favorite us, whatever your podcast vehicle does, or check us out on YouTube because I bet people are wondering what you look like, Scott. They're
Maybe.
going to go, does his face match his voice?
Maybe. I don't want to let anybody down, Greg. Trying hard, not let anybody down.
Well, it's
Uh,
not, it's always surprising, it seems like. You're like, I figured he was older or younger,
right.
taller, right? Whatever.
Oh man, you
Got
never
green
know.
eyes.
Digital twins. You never know. But hey, Greg, we've got a full house today. Full house for a big show with a great repeat guest. Let's say hello to a few folks. Josh is tuned in from Seattle. Human and Heat makes me think I'm back in South Carolina. Josh says, "Hang in there, man." We got Jose tuned in from Southern California. How you doing,
No
Jose?
humidity down there,
No kidding.
but probably pretty toasty.
Donna, good morning from hell in Houston. She says.
Amen. The only city in America that has more humidity than Boca Raton.
Oh, let's see here. Yeah, Josh points out the U.S. Women's national soccer team loss on penalty kicks.
Yeah.
Oh, that was
Did you
disappointing.
see
Of
the
course,
last one? The very last one, they had to use a camera to assist with the call or
really,
confirm the call. Yeah, it was that close.
man.
Yep.
Let's see, Liz is also tuned in Houston. Natalie's back with us from Charlotte. Good to see you, Natalie. T Squared, who holds down the fort for us on YouTube, says, "Bring on the nourishment and toss me a rain jacket because them storms are coming to hit Baltimore hard." Is that right, Greg? I haven't been tracking
Yeah,
Baltimore.
yeah. So, we got nailed in Atlanta yesterday. I was at Ted's Montana Grill and I
Yeah.
was at the bar and got caught in a downpour.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess
Um,
go ahead.
so, but there's a whole slew of storms coming through. Atlanta is on the very southern end of them, but Nashville and it looks like Virginia and um, Maryland and Delaware and way up the coast. We'll have to ask Lee if he's in the path. I'm not sure
Okay.
if it goes that far north, but yeah, going to be some
All
big
right.
ones.
Batten down the hatches, everybody. Let's see,
Amen.
Catherine tuned in from rainy Connecticut via LinkedIn. Great to see you, Catherine.
Well, I guess that
Michelle,
answers that question, doesn't it?
right. Michelle from Chicago, and Gino, our dear friend Gino from North Alabama. Great to see everybody. If I skipped over everybody, y'all keep it coming. We want to hear your take as we mix it in with Greg and Lee's as we work through these four stories. But first, Greg,
Mm,
first,
mm.
you know we're out on the hunt for really good resources to help folks in the good fight. And I had another graphics issue, Greg. So let me see. Hey, picture this as I get my graphics working, Greg.
I
I'm
love
a, I'm
that.
a, I'm a
Picture
paint a
this.
picture.
All right, let's
Um,
test your wordplay.
Speak about the value, as we're talking about resources, the value of the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index for Q2 2023. And then I'm going to get this popped up in just a minute. So take it away, Gregory.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I had to miss that this quarter. I missed doing it, but
Yes.
we had Dino Konstantin Limbarakis sit in and do a great job. He's an incredible analyst as well, and talk through what the facts were of that thing, but also how people use it. So we got to hear a little bit about how people use it, which I think is really important. I'd be fascinated for two things, Scott, now that I'm thinking about it. One, to kind of get Lee's take on that, right? I mean, he has given his take before, been actually on the quarterly show where we've done that, but maybe get his point of view, because nobody, and no joke, his nickname is, with good reason, no one is more connected to what's going on in logistics than Lee is. But also, Scott, a little bit of selfish motivation here.
Yes.
You know, U.S. Bank is the
Yes.
main sponsor for the stadium that the Minnesota Vikings play in. And can you think of anyone's favorite team that might be playing the Vikings in Minnesota this season who might want
The
some
Chiefs.
That's right. How about those Chiefs? Who might want some, here's my shameless plug. I might want some tickets to that game. That would be fun.
Who knows?
Who knows on this show? So
Matthew from Dubai may come in and hit that need for tickets. We'll see. Or Anupam from India. Who knows where the tickets may come from?
I love that we get to see the correct spelling of Kolkata, which I grew up seeing the English interpretation, Calcutta.
Yes.
Right. I love that all those names, since they've gotten really independent of England, all those names have kind of gone back to more traditional spellings.
Agreed. That's great. Eagle eye. Excellent point, Greg. One last note, folks. One last note as we were talking about the U.S. Bank Freight Payment Index. It's free to get your own copy, right? It comes out each quarter. You can go to freight.usbank.com, or you can hit the link that we dropped in the chat, and you're not going to want to miss it. And I'm sure Amanda and Catherine, thanks for all the work you do behind the scenes. I bet they'll drop a link to the live stream where you can hear our hour-long commentary and analysis of the most recently released Q2 2023. And I tell you, Greg, you hit the nail on the head. Lee, I think when Lee joined us, that record went platinum because Lee hit the mark, as he always
he's got
does.
it hanging up in his studio in New York.
That's right. Signed. All right. Other resources, folks. Over the weekend, we had a very popular edition of our With That Said newsletter.
Yeah.
And Greg, we probably gained, 100 subscribers over the weekend because we hit this, we offered up several tips on selecting the right training or certification partners. And folks, not only check this out, but let us know your tips for selecting the right training and certification partners. Greg, training and certification, that whole professional development sector is billions and billions, in terms of, market size. And unfortunately, a lot of folks, they get sold or they go with the first provider, or they don't do their homework, or you name it. But man, there's a lot of great providers out there that do exactly what you expect them to do. And then there's a lot of bad actors out there, like any other industry. Your quick thought on the training and certification industry.
Yeah, I think it's time for a big change there. I mean, there are well-established and highly respected and accepted and almost demanded certifications in supply chain, for instance. I'm thinking solely of supply chain.
Yep.
And yet there's a difference between being highly demanded and well respected and actually being valuable to the work that you do every day. I've even talked to multiple. This is a real challenge for a lot of universities who provide supply chain degrees, that because of the rigor that's required in academia, that sometimes what they're teaching is ages, a decade almost old, sometimes more. And that's true with some of the certifications that exist out there. So I think one of the things that's important to note is there is the difference between getting that training for what you have to be considered credible and getting that training that sets you up to be successful in your job now and into the future. Not pitching anybody, but a lot of the industry certifications in supply chain they're a valuable baseline, but a lot of what they're teaching is outdated and doesn't apply to something we talk about all the time, which is this vast abundance of robust data. They deal with methodologies that have focused on the way supply chain used to be, when you had to guess at everything because there wasn't so much robust data that could indicate more effectively what needs to be done in supply chain. And there are providers out there that I won't name, but I will if you ask me. Seriously, if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, I'll let you know who I trust. It's much, much more modern and much more flexible.
Right.
So you have to kind of weigh that old rigor to the new adaptability of training these days. And I think you really ought to consider both. And there are big changes coming in training where you can get it via subscription. It doesn't cost you $1,100 for every test or whatever it is these days, where that training is very valuable and applicable today.
Yes. Well said, Greg, as always. Folks, check out With That Said. I think we dropped 3 or 4 really universal rules of thumb, regardless really what you're looking at. But most importantly, starting with the first one, knowing what success looks like and working backwards from there. All right. So y'all check that out. And then finally, folks, we've got a great show coming up next week with our dear friends at Esker and Dr. Morgan Swink from Texas Christian University, home of a wonderful supply chain program there. We're going to be offering up key findings, actionable findings from TCU's Working Capital Report, which is based on leadership input from, I believe, hundreds of C-level leaders from across industry. That we're going to drop the link, but that's August 16th at 12 noon Eastern time. Whew. All right, Greg, got a lot going on. So folks, buckle up. We're here to deliver resources and proven, been there, done that, analysis, expertise, and a whole bunch more. So with that said, Greg, are you ready to bring on our dear repeat guest, one of our favorites here around here? You ready?
I am. Let's do it.
Let's buckle up. We'll bring in one of our dear friends, one of industry's go-to analysts for all things transportation and logistics for sure. I want to welcome in Lee Klaskow, Senior Analyst, Transportation and Logistics at Bloomberg Intelligence. Lee, how are we doing today?
I'm good. I like that transition. Zoom.
That is officially called the swoosh, and that is the star of the show, is it not, Greg?
It is, and few people have been honored with that, and very few as often as you have, Lee. So welcome back.
That is right.
Well, I appreciate that, and don't sell yourself short. I think you guys are the stars of the show.
Thanks. Thanks, LK3000. Hey,
wait,
Lee.
I thought it was 4,000.
We're rolling out model updates.
We're awaiting an upgrade.
Okay, all right.
Lee, great to have you back. Oh, we love your analysis as we've been bragging and your ears been burning, but also enjoy your sense of humor. And before we get into, as you're dialed in from your New York offices, highfalutin. I wish we were doing this over a delicious lunch at one of the restaurants up there next time. But what I want to start with, speaking of New York, is the Giants. You're a big New York Giants fan. Now, before we get into the 4 stories, what is your bold, fearless prediction for what the Giants season is going to look like coming up?
They will not be the worst team in the NFC East.
Okay. All right.
That's pretty bold. It'll be pretty interesting to see how well they do this year. It was fun. I got to go to a training camp last week with my son. He got to get a lot of players, sign footballs and stuff like that. Most of the players that were signing stuff were the wide receivers and the offensive line. So it's pretty cool to see the huge offensive line and some of the tiny wide receivers that are like, hey, maybe I could play in the NFL.
Well, okay. So Lee, we asked him, he delivered, Greg. So the Giants aren't expected to be then the worst team in the NFC East. Greg, your thoughts on either the Giants or, of course, your beloved Kansas City Chiefs?
Well, I hope the Giants aren't the worst, because I always hope one team is the worst. in the NFC East. But I'm not going to mention them. I was thinking about the demographics of our listener audience today, and I'm thinking I don't want to mess with a certain state.
That's right. We got California represented, Greg, or I guess it's not California
No,
anymore.
it's not California. No.
Yeah.
Don't you worry about what it is.
Okay.
Don't try to narrow it down for
That's right. That's right. Well, so all right. So we got the Giants, we got the Chiefs. I'm not going to mention the Falcons, but what I'm going to mention before we move on is Lee. I was thinking the other day about those late 80s, early 90s Giants teams. You know, Mark Bavaro, I think, was one of the tight ends. Phil Simms, Otis Anderson, right? The running back that was just
OJ.
And he's just so durable. Who else, Lee? As you think back through some of your Giants favorite teams, what's one of your favorite players? And then we're gonna move
on. Probably Meggett. He was like a third down back. He was like this little guy, and he was always came through in a clutch.
Okay.
He did a little bit of returning too, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. He was slick as snot on a doorknob.
Yeah. Yum.
Oh, I love that. I hadn't thought about Dave Meggett in a long time. It's a great pull. Jose is also a big Giants fan, so we'll have to get Jose and Lee hooked up.
He in San Diego? Oh, well, yeah. That would make you a Giants fan.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier before we move on is Donna was asking about certification tips and wants to drop. So let's drop Greg's LinkedIn there, and we'll see if Don and Greg can hook up and talk about certification and training tips and stuff like that. Since Greg asked and Don is stepping up.
I offered.
That's right.
I will deliver.
Yes, you will. So Lee and Greg, we got a lot of stuff to get in here today. And kidding aside, I hate to start with the worst news, but you can't say none of us saw this coming. So, of course, over the weekend, Bloomberg, as reported here by Bloomberg, Yellow has officially declared bankruptcy. The company's CEO, Darren Hawkins, said in a statement, quote, "It is with profound disappointment that Yellow announces that it is closing after nearly 100 years in business," end quote. The Nashville-based company's decision to close now sadly leaves some 30,000 employees without jobs. But good news here. Yellow and the American Trucking Associations, the ATA, are launching an effort to help employees find work. And we're going to drop that link in the chat. So, Lee, I want to start with, this ongoing development with Yellow. Give us your take on what we've seen and what's next.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to your point, it's been 20 plus years in the making. It's kind of like watching a train, train crash. It's just you just know it's going to happen eventually. It really stems from some poor acquisitions that just weren't properly integrated. I believe it was 2003 they bought Roadway. Usually when you do an acquisition, 1 and 1 should equal more than 2. Here it was less than 2 because they just kept the networks the same. You'd have a Roadway facility across from a Yellow facility, and they might be both operating well below capacity. And, be given the work rules from the union, it was really tough to integrate it. So, we would really say that there's enough blame to go around on why this happened. And the sad thing is that, most less than truckload companies, when they're in financial problems and they have to file bankruptcy, it's usually always a liquidation versus a restructuring, because, it's almost like a run on the bank. When shippers get word or feel that, their freight might be in jeopardy, they're not going to use that carrier. And LTL networks are very asset intensive, so there's that deleveraging effect. So a company that wasn't making much money is actually now losing even more money because they're not able to cover it's harder for them to cover those fixed costs. And so that that's what we've seen. It's a shame. I think that if they had the foresight, they might have been able to spin out a couple of their regional networks like New Penn. We all know Saya. That is a spinoff from Yellow from a long time ago. So there could have been some good coming out of it, but I think we're well past that point. And the the kind of the last straw is when the Teamsters threatened to strike over Yellow, saying they weren't going to be able to make a pension payment, and I think that was like the last straw for shippers. They started, looking for alternatives to divert their freight because A, they need their stuff delivered, and B,
Right.
they were afraid that their freight might get stuck within the Yellow network and not able to, or be very expensive to get it where it needs to go. And so that's been a great opportunity for a lot of the competitors. The Bloomberg Intelligence less than truckload peer group is up over 80% this year. That's a pretty good return, and that's in the face of declining volumes. So the ones that are left standing are could kind of cherry pick what freight they want, because not everything that Yellow carries, an XPO or a FedEx Freight or an ArcBest, they're not necessarily going to want to take all that freight, because some of it might not be palletized, which is something that most LTL carriers prefer because it's easier. And then also Yellow is also known for carrying things that might have higher cargo claims, like like glass or TVs, things that kind of have a higher probability of breaking in transit just because of things getting moved around. And so it'll be very interesting to see. Yellow had about 6.9% of the share of shipments, at least that's last year. Obviously, that has declined this year. So there's plenty of market share up for grab, and you're seeing that in like the stocks that we cover. We cover XPO and Old Dominion specifically at Bloomberg Intelligence, and then we follow. We also cover FedEx, so FedEx Freight. They have a big LTL business, and there are other public carriers that we don't cover, but we follow from a tangential basis,
Right.
like a SAIA and an ArcBest and a TFI.
Lee, that is quite. That's why we call him Logistics Lee, folks. What a great, well-rounded, holistic take on what's going on. Greg, before I hit you, I want to get your thoughts here. As I mentioned, we're sharing this job initiative that the ATA is partnering with former Yellow Employees Alliance. Y'all check that out. If nothing else, share it. Get the word out. Let's help these folks. And Josh, man, talk about the human component here. One of my dad's buddies, Josh, says lost his pension there. So, Greg, your thoughts on what's going on with Yellow?
I have more questions than answers, frankly. But I think, Lee, you covered it really well, that this has been coming for a long time. I think back to when I was a kid. I will miss that logo. I can't lie. I think about when I was a kid driving down the highway. Those trucks were so identifiable, just yellow and black. That's it, right? So, but it has been a disaster for decades there, and I think you enunciated it pretty well. There's enough blame to go around, and this kind of goes to a bigger thing that happens in companies when the management isn't invested enough in the company. They'll run the company to keep their jobs for as long as they can, and then burn it to the ground. I mean, it does happen, right? This is why when people invest in companies, they want. And there's a lot of controversy around this. They want the management to have a significant stake in the company because it's in their best interest. And sometimes they're deferring their multi-million-dollar salaries. Sometimes they're not for growth in the shares of the company, which aligns them much more clearly with the good of the company. So I can't even say that was the case here, but it just made me think of those kind of scenarios where people kind of ride these things to keep a job. But I actually have a question more than a comment, and that is, what do you think the absorption rate of these 30,000 jobs will be, considering this, the state of shortage of drivers, for instance, and other talent in this industry, but also the kind of the conditions of LTL freight? I mean, do you think is this a net benefit to the market or to these people, other than things like losing pensions and probably weeks or months of salary?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear more about the viewer that said that about the lost pension, because at the end of the day, the pensions are guaranteed by the government. So
and the government's going to get paid their $700 million back.
And right. And the Teamsters Yellow is part of the multi-employer pension plan, so it has other companies that are contributing to it. So I'd love to learn more about like what happened to that individual, because as far as I know, these people that have been working hard and paying into this pension plan, they should be getting their benefits. Maybe they're not getting their full benefits because their employment is stopping and they're not working 30 years, they're only working 10 years. I mean, that's possible, but they should be getting something, I would imagine. And to your point, a lot of truck drivers, they're going to be absorbed because maybe they're going to need, the other LTL carriers are going to need line haul drivers. They're going to need pickup and delivery drivers in local markets. And you don't know what is really going to happen from this, because so Yellow goes out of business, no one's going to buy all of their assets. Like, no one wants them, right? Because I mean, Yellow has yucky trucks, they're old, they have, their equipment's old. I mean, you look at the road, a lot of their trailing equipment looks like it's like, one leg or one axle into the grave. And so anyway, so no one's going to buy all their assets, but you could have like a Knight Swift that's, looking to expand their LTL footprint. They've done it with 2 acquisitions of 2 regional carriers. They might try to build out that regional network with acquisitions of facilities. And if you're going to be buying, when I'm not talking about they're going to be buying 10, 20, 30 facilities, like one-offs, you're going to need people in those facilities. So there are going to be some jobs. The truckload market, as you guys know, there's a high turnover. There's always a demand for good, safe drivers. I think, and I think a lot of these folks will land on their feet, but obviously, I've been laid off before, so I know the stresses that it's induced of like not knowing the unknown. But I think a lot of them will get absorbed, doing very similar things to what they were doing prior, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, there's 6.9% of shipments that are up for grabs. The other LTL carriers are going to need people. And listen, a lot of those LTL carriers are running below capacity because they're kind of waiting for the uptick in demand, so they didn't lay off during this downturn. Maybe they're dealing with headcount through attrition and all that stuff. But I think there's going to be an opportunity. For most of them, it's 30,000 folks, and maybe some of them just will decide, hey, it's time for me to retire. I've worked hard enough, long enough.
Well, I really appreciate you both weighing in. Lee, of course, really appreciate your take on what's going on with Yellow. And we're going to, let's end on that optimistic note. There's lots of folks that'll be looking for the talent. I love what ATA is doing to help facilitate those conversations that got to take place. So we'll keep our finger on the pulse. And folks, again, share that, help make these conversations happen so that these 30,000 folks can find a way to make ends meet. Okay, I got to shift gears. Because also in the news here recently, the Canadian West Coast port workers, as reported by our friends at CNBC, the votes are in, they've been tallied, and they say yes to the ratification of a labor deal. The first deal, as y'all know, Greg and Lee and all of our friends out there, was rejected. The second deal, though, did the trick. A 14-day labor strike by dock workers, however, has backed up freight at ports in Vancouver and Prince Rupert. Say that right, Prince Rupert. It's expected to take the railroads about 2 months or more to clear out the backlog of containers, though. Now, here's the number for you, Greg and Lee, everyone out there. At the peak of the strike, right, some $12 billion of goods were floating and stuck on vessels outside Canadian ports. Lee, before I get your take here, I was trying to think where I'd last heard the name Rupert other than this port. And I think it was Stewie's bear on Family Guy was named Rupert, if I'm not mistaken, Lee and Greg. But anyway, Lee, tell us what your take here on the vote and what's to come next.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say I liked your first news source. I thought that was a better news source than the second news source. I'm kidding. They're great. Obviously this is Prince Rupert. Actually, I've been there a couple of times with some analyst days from Canadian National, and that's a port. It's within 50 miles south of Alaska, I believe, and it's pretty fantastic. Newport has plenty of room for expansion, and Canadian National is the only railroad that kind of services it. So it's a real differentiator for CN. All that being said, I mean, these last couple of years have been, the year of labor. They've just had a great opportunity to flex their muscle, rightfully so. Inflation is extremely high. Their cost of, what their purchasing power has declined a lot, and they were pretty instrumental during the pandemic. They were considered essential workers all across the world, and helped us get toilet paper when there was none, which I appreciate. I was tired of using newspapers. Yeah. So this is going to create, it's interesting. So like I cover all different modes of transportation, and there's been one dislocation after the next. And this is just another dislocation that's going to take some work to work through. Luckily for CN, Port of Prince Rupert, I mean, some of the freight was probably diverted to other ports, maybe into the U.S. But they're going to move that stuff eventually. Call it, maybe they'll move 80% of what they were supposed to move, and it'll take time. You've seen, the intermodal number has been pretty poor for the Canadians, and some of that has to do with the impact of Vancouver and Rupert. So, it's a net positive. You saw, like we were talking about labor, you saw it with the UPS, Teamsters getting, a pretty good contract. A lot of the railroads getting additional benefits, whether it's as crazy as it sounds, like time off for being sick, things of that nature. So it's really been, the year of labor, I would say, and that's going to increase costs for shippers. Because I know a lot of your listeners are shippers. Because guess what? If you're a railroad or if you're a trucking company and you have to pay your people more, you still need to get a certain return, so you make those reinvestments into assets, and that's going to come at higher rates. So it's almost like a snowballing effect. They're having to raise rates because labor is demanding more money, and that's inflationary. And then the transportation provider then has to charge the shipper more money, and that's inflationary. But the good news, it seems like the Fed is doing a pretty good job at raising rates, and it seems like the worst of inflation is behind us, and rates might stop, and they might stop raising rates pretty soon.
Okay, and we're going to talk about inflation more in an article in a few minutes here. Hey, Greg, before I get you to weigh in, Lee, one other to add to, all the folks are going to be pay more. If you've been shipping with Yellow, going back to the first story and moving that book of business, you're going to be paying more, most likely. Lee, quick question: Do you happen to know? You may not know offhand, but how long that has just been ratified? Do you happen to know how many years?
At the ports?
Yes.
I don't, but if I had to guess, it's probably 5 years.
Okay, is that okay?
But that's a pure guess, so don't go.
All right. So, Greg, that might be a guess, but all the other expertise and goodness Lee has delivered by the truckload is not.
Yeah,
Your thoughts,
literally.
Greg?
I think I don't think this is necessarily a condition of all of this sort of salary unrest, whether it's union or non-union. But the ports remain remarkably inefficient, and the cost is going up, and there are other solutions. We're going to talk about one of those solutions in another article here. And I have a feeling we're going to start to see, as we've seen in many other industries, a push towards technology to start to solve some of these issues, some of the accountability issues, and throughput issues, efficiency issues that continue to exist in logistics generally, but also in the ports, which, considering the regulatory and accountability metrics that they should be living up to, are remarkably lax globally. And so I think this is just one of those other symptoms that's gonna accelerate the path to technology. Now, the benefit that the workers have is that many ports are run by the governments, who are going to, resist that because it's not politically expedient to replace human jobs. But the efficiency and effectiveness of it undoubtedly requires more technology to enable. So that's, I think less about this particular incident, more about a lot of the incidents that we've talked about over the last several years.
Yep.
The shortage of labor, the rapid running away from these types of jobs that the younger generations are doing, and the inevitability of technology to undertake some of these roles and improve the performance of them at the same time.
Yes. Well said, Greg. Well said. I'm going to share a couple quick comments. Hey, look quick. Lee, I know you can still hear us, but maybe I thought you were hard at work tackling a new supply chain headline, but I think your screen may have frozen. Hey, that happens. It's Monday.
But at least he look how intensively intellectual he looks.
Yes, that is right. Maybe we'll see if we can't bring him in, bring him out really quick. We'll check that and be right back. Hey, in the meantime, this gentleman here.
That's good. I really just thought he was judging what I was saying very intensely.
Right.
I almost hope he didn't hear it.
Right. Craig, this gentleman here, get how poetic this is. Says words at the top of magnificence. Thank you for your enlightenment and thank you for your creative efforts. Hey, really appreciate that. David, who I think is in LA, says more ports and more railways. I think he meant to say will pave the way for the big three: Canada, U.S., and Mexico. One of the most unique trading blocks of trading partners in the entire world. It looks like that's right, Greg. It looks like we have temporarily lost Lee, but we'll be bringing him back in just a minute.
He's in New York.
That's right.
Right. Oh, there he is. Woo!
Hi. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was about to go to Bloomberg News and see what was happening in New York, man.
I was frozen, and I was trying to say I was off by a year. It was the contract is 4 years.
Okay.
4 years.
And the U.S. is 6 years, so maybe I was just trying to get the average.
Yeah, that's okay.
Averages.
Yeah. 4 years.
So it's really interesting. One of the phrases you said, Lee, the last few years has been like the year of labor. We should have T-shirts or something. And then Greg, of course, is referencing the tidal wave of more practical, more powerful, efficient, cheaper, and just more capable technology. And it's be really interesting as these two forces come together. Anything before we move on to the next? We got a couple really cool stories. One talks about this two-step. These two forces come together in just a second. But Lee, I'm going to give you the last word on the good news, at least, that a deal has been reached and the Canadian West ports are getting unclogged. Your last word, Lee.
On that, I just think that you'll see some intermodal pickup, especially from the CP and CN, which is good news for those guys.
It is. Okay.
Obviously.
Yes. All right. Speaking of good news, Gregory, folks, if you're on the hunt for timely news, analysis, practitioner takes, or a lot of the conversations we facilitate, including some of the registration-only conversations, like a lot of our webinars that are really popular, join the Now community. We got the link where you can do that so you won't miss a single thing. And Greg, play up the FOMO effect, that fear of missing out. Your final word, Greg, before we move on to the next story.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think people are telling us we're not promoting this. We're the most trusted voice in supply chain. So we just want to connect all of the practitioners, all of the people who are doing the doing in supply chain, and give them a little bit of extra value. We can't be here every day. Scott could. I'm just too lazy.
Man.
But there's so much more that we want to share, things that are important, like we'd love to share some of the news, like Bloomberg, like Lee and his group are uncovering at all times, and give some thoughts on that, and also to have a connection between all of the practitioners out there, regardless of where you are or what you do in the industry, whether you believe that technology is inevitable or whether you believe that the labor shortage is affecting you, and whether you believe it will long term, or what you're doing about any of those things. I think it's just a great opportunity to get together and share.
Well said, Greg. So join in. We've got the link there in the chat, and y'all click there. You're one click away. And you know what? It's not a 18 field information or maybe 180 field information collection form. It's a simple 2 or 3 fields. Easy to do. All right. So let's move on to this next story. Now, Lee and Greg, get a load of this graphic that the team put together here. How about that AI in action, that bot in action? Here's an interesting read for our third story. So USA Today is reporting on research conducted by the Pew Research Center focused on what jobs and tasks are most, quote, exposed by AI. So the researchers using federal data say that 1 in 5 U.S. workers have jobs with key tasks that are more likely to be aided or replaced by AI. Now, they say jobs that involve critical thinking, writing, science, and math tend to be more exposed. Why did I have to study all that stuff and struggle through all that math in high school and college then? However, the research states that workers in these roles that are more familiar with AI, well, they seem to see a lot more benefit than harm. But before anyone starts fearing that the bots, like this bot here that's kicking his heels up for a second, his or her heels up for a second, before they think the bots are coming for all of our jobs, the researchers did state that job loss related to the emergence of new technology are usually offset by the creation of new jobs. Get this, according to census data, some 60% of workers today are employed in jobs that didn't exist in 1940. Some, goodness, 83 years ago, if my math is right. Greg, I want to get your thoughts here first on this story and really some of the thoughts behind it.
Yeah, well, let me start with don't waste time fearing it because it's inevitable. So there's no reason to fear it. There is only time to there's only reason and time to figure out how to deal with it. First, discover how exposed you think your job is. And for instance, some of the jobs they feel are most exposed are any job that is repetitive and what do I want to say, rigorous, right? Where it has a very standard process, although those have been under attack by what's called RPA, robotic process automation, for a long time, which often doesn't even consist of AI. So I would argue that technology generally is coming for some jobs, and frankly should, because it can be done more effectively, less costly, and more accurately and completely by virtue of the fact that technology never forgets a step or never interjects a bias that's not necessary. But we humans are great at things, physical things, and we're great at interpretive things when there is too little data, too little pre-existing process, right? And conflicting conditions that simply can't be solved by a technology. So I would say first, accept, right? And then second, get to work finding a job where that human gift, that gift of making life and death or business life and death decisions with too little or inaccurate data are necessary, and start building your career towards those kind of things. Or some of the physical jobs that are, I think, going to be assisted by AI, but still conducted by human beings. And I got to tell you about this one young man that I've known since he was a little kid. My friend Alan Helt, his son Andrew, decided not to go to college. Mike Rowe has got to be loving that, right? The dirty jobs guy.
Right.
Decided not to go to college. He's becoming a professional electrician, and he'll probably wind up making a couple $100,000 a year because people are staying away from those jobs in droves. And those jobs, while they can be assisted by AI, meaning training in the field, here's what you need to do, but a human still needs to do that. Those kind of jobs are plentiful and in great need. Let me assure you, try to get an electrician or a plumber, right? Or an HVAC person in the dead of summer, or a roofer after this rainstorm that's about to hit Lee's house. So,
I actually have a confession to make. I'm an AI bot.
I thought there was a similarity between this graphic and Lee Klaskow. I knew it. All you got to do is put your feet up.
Rise of the machines.
That's right.
Both have the same hairline.
Perfect. Speaking of hair, Lee,
that's what makes
get
it
your
so realistically.
Yeah,
that's right. Speaking of hair, in the article from the research from Pew Research Center, I grew up in Aiken, South Carolina, getting my hair cut. My dad would take me to a gentleman's by the name of Elmo the barber, right? And barbers are one of the least disruptive roles, most protected roles that AI is not going to be replacing anytime soon. So Elmo and Mr. Bird and all these other barbers out there doing good work. To quote Greg, never fear, never fear. All right, Lee, we covered a lot of ground there, but talk about what the article, the research, what Greg said. Would you tend to agree?
Yes and no. I mean, I think AI right now, and again, I'm not a technologist or a futurist or anything like that. I think technology is the blockchain of today.
Yeah.
If you remember 7 years ago, it was a blockchain is going to change the world.
Right.
And there's definitely some applications where it works, but the way the world was talking, it was going to be everywhere. Like you'd go turn around and you'd be at the supermarket and you'd be dealing with blockchain. But that didn't pan out, right? But blockchain does work for certain aspects. I think AI is the same thing. I think and again, I'm not a technologist or a futurist, but like machine learning and AI, yeah, these are all incrementally good things. I think that if they're not checked and regulated, I think it can be a bad thing. So I do think that the federal government has to step in and say, if you are using AI, you have to tell people that it's AI versus a human, because I think that that's important. But to Greg's point, like as some jobs are going to be more susceptible to it. I know over the next 10 years, assuming I'm still doing what I'm doing, I will probably use more AI in my day-to-day. It'll make me more productive and smarter and maybe even better looking. I don't know. But, but I will definitely be leveraging it. But I don't think it's going to necessarily take over my job. Because to the end of the day, a lot of people's jobs is dealing with people, right? It's not just computer on computer. It's people on people. So, I think that to Greg's point, that if you want to learn a trade, that you're obviously going. I'm embarrassed to say I had an electrician come to my house to change a light bulb, and that's not a joke. But
Man,
but it was a very special light bulb. Let's go with that.
It was an LED light bulb. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah,
I was just like,
it was in your 27-foot foyer, right?
You have Oscar the barber. I had Oscar. You had Elmo the barber.
Yeah.
I have Oscar the electrician. So he came over. He loves us because he's like, this is the easiest money. Anyway,
right.
But but those kind of trades are obviously a lot more protective. I'm reading probably the same things you're reading. They're saying, there's some aspects of law that could be taken over by AI and accounting.
Right.
So, we'll see where it plays out. Whatever the world is telling you and the headlines is telling you, I would discount that by 80%.
Okay.
Just in terms of what the real world application is going to end up being. I think it's going to touch everyone's lives and make us all more productive. But I don't think I'm going to be sitting next to a robot anytime soon. Okay. I don't think so.
Okay. I like how you look over your shoulder as you say that. You never know. You never know, Greg and Lee. Hey, really quick, Martin, you bet. Great to have you here, and you're welcome for this information and the analysis. Catherine shares, hello, Lee. Great to hear your views here. And David makes a great point. Smart home technology is already here. Absolutely. Been here for years. Okay.
Not AI, though.
That's right. Good point.
It's not
Greg.
AI. Just that's like Siri is not AI, which is something that often surprises people.
More folks should know. More folks should know. And if you got it, if you don't know, reach out to Greg White, and he will count the ways.
I'll do what Lee's doing right now. For you.
No. All right. So, folks, we got one more great read to get. I thought a great read to get into. And that comes to us from our friends at Retail Dive. And this article is focused on headwinds and tailwinds for retailers as we move into not only back to school, my kids are already in back to school, and of course, a holiday season. But folks, Greg, Lee, everyone out there, you got to throw out the numbers from recent, more unique holiday seasons. We can't rely on what consumers did during lockdowns, the hoarding months, the peak inflation periods. So getting down to brass tacks, this article states, first, the good. Inflation is down. Consumer sentiment is up. UPS strike averted. Greg, as we boldly predicted, consumers finally, on what's good, I guess, consumers desperately want a return to normal. Although I would say we're not going to get that. Then some of the challenges. Consumers are demanding deals as inflation has retreated, as both Greg and Lee touched on. And some see the end of student loan forgiveness, those dollars that are going to now be going into student loan repayments, as eating into retail spend. So, Lee, I want to start with you. What are some of your thoughts as we head into the holiday season?
Yeah, so when we look at demand, just in generally speaking, whether it's consumer demand, industrial demand, so no matter what mode, I mean, the name of the game really is normalization, right? So from those unsustainable creamy peaks that we had in demand and rates, everything's coming back down to what we'll call normal. And some of it's becoming a new normal, some of it's just regular old-fashioned vanilla normal. So with the peak season, when we talk to companies, a lot of them are telling us that destocking is kind of over. We just met with someone from DHL today, and that was their message. But a lot of companies aren't seeing restocking yet. Our call going into the fourth quarter and into peak season is that we are going to see an uplift in seasonal demand, not a peak, not a speed bump, but just like a slowly increase in demand. So the reason for that is a lot of things we discussed, lower inventory levels. The consumer is pretty resilient and pretty strong. And the fact that last year there was absolutely no seasonality. And so you have all those things together. The normal is coming back. And so that's what we're expecting. And then what does that mean? Well, it'll probably benefit air freight more than ocean freight because, if somebody needs something, a retailer, and they're just like, oh my God, we got to fill up the inventory quick because we're seeing these positive trends. This is a what if scenario. They're going to obviously bring stuff in from Asia on an airplane because going on a boat takes too long. So there could be winners and losers. The expedited folks would probably be more winners, the FedExes and the UPSs of the world. And at the end of the day, LTL is probably not going to benefit from it. Parts of truckload, depending on who your customer is, you'll benefit from it. All that being said, spot rates in the truckload market, they've appeared to bottom. We're maybe a little more bullish, thinking that things are going to start the spot market and the truckload market because of these patterns that we're laying out. You could see spot market rates start slowly increase, and we're not talking crazy numbers. We're just talking a slow increase,
Right.
And that should set up a pretty good 2024 on a contractual basis. Where you saw rates down as much as low double digits. You could see contractual rates increase next year.
Very nice. So, Lee, an analogy there, as Greg, as he referenced, kind of like a slow little uplift. It's kind of like Joe Montana passing on. Joe Montana didn't have an arm, but boy, he could put that ball in a nice little lob like nobody else in football, at least throughout the 80s. Greg, your thoughts, though. We were talking about headwinds and tailwinds for retailers. Lee weighed in. Your thoughts, Greg?
Yeah, I think Dwight Clark would argue whether Montana had an arm because that was a bullet that he caught.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Game.
Fair enough.
But
He
that
had two
was a
arms.
rare. That was a rare instance. Yeah, I think I think it's really easy to get confused by terminology, right? Inflation is down, meaning it's no longer at 9 or 11% or whatever it peaked at, and whichever standard you use. But it is still excessive, and it still is years from coming down. And recognize that we've also had incredible inflation since 2021. So the impact has gone up and up and up. In the U.S., credit card debt hit another record. Almost 50% of all Americans rely on credit cards to pay their monthly bills, according to 1031. Another research organization, and a huge portion of millennials and zennials, almost 50% of them use credit card debt for daily expenses. And almost every American, a majority of Americans, not almost every, sorry, that's a different stat. A majority of Americans have missed a credit card payment in the last year. So I think there are some contraindicators that say that while consumer sentiment is high, their flexibility is relatively low because of the overhang of credit card debt, which is exceedingly expensive. I hope, because there are a lot of economists also who believe that people will be done spending other people's money by the end of this year. I hope they don't spend it all at Christmas, but I do hope everybody gets a good Christmas or holiday season of their respective beliefs. And I think that we'll start to see the rubber meet the road next year sometime. I'm not saying that's a recession. Again, not an economist, but accurate, almost as accurate, which is almost never. And I don't know. I mean, I would say that there is so much conflicting data in at least the U.S. marketplace that it's going to be interesting. But at least it does feel, to Lee's point, it does feel like the retailers are on more sound footing than they have been in the past.
Yep.
And that's great for the marketplace. So, and some of them are starting to employ much more modern means of identifying what demand will be. So I think they won't get as much out of alignment as they were when I bought lots of patio furniture for 70% off at the beginning of 2021 or whatever it was.
Well,
so, anyway, that's my thought.
Love it. Greg and Lee, retail is a fascinating study, especially the last 3 or 4 years. T Squared says, hey, be on the lookout for greedflation, though. Greedflation. T Squared, you have to drop more color commentary.
Okay, yes. Share that with us, Tyrone.
Right. Hey, I would just add a couple things here. First off, contraindicators. Greg, what a word. I feel like I've got to go back and get a
well, I've been watching Lee a lot, so
okay.
I have expanded my vocabulary.
I'm going to have to keep up with the two of y'all. And then going back to what I'm a big lover of Breyer's vanilla ice cream. So Lee, when you talked about old-fashioned vanilla normal, hey, it hits home with me any day of the week. Love Breyer's.
A great example of shrinkflation there. Not only has the price gone up double on my favorite, but the size has gone down, and probably for good. We'll never see a half gallon of ice cream ever again in certain brands.
So true, Greg. So true. One last thing, and then we're going to make sure folks know how to connect with Lee. And by the way, Catherine and Amanda, thanks for all that you've done. We're going to close out with Lee in the shot or with us here today. Folks, you better be lifting weights and taking your vitamins, because I'd predict during retail season coming up, there's going to be, you could have a buggy full of stuff, but you're going to be self-checking all that stuff through because workers will be there won't be a whole bunch of lines open. So be ready.
Buggy is what Lee calls a cart, everybody.
Okay. All right.
Right.
All right. So speaking of Lee Klaskow, Logistics Lee, LK 3000 with an update coming to 4000 to the market soon. Lee, always a pleasure. I always feel like I leave these conversations, at least I for one, even smarter after we've had an hour-long chat with you, Lee. So let's make sure folks know how to connect with you. I know that you do a lot of keynotes. You're invited in for a lot of different interviews, a lot of different events. How can folks connect with you and the good people over at Bloomberg Intelligence?
Yeah. So a lot of the work that I do, the research that we do, it goes on the Bloomberg terminal, which is a subscription. And then some of that gets feed into the .com product, so Bloomberg.com. You'll see a lot of my research work referenced by our reporters with the stuff that you read, Bloomberg News on Bloomberg.com. So that's one area. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I'm on X, I guess we're calling it now, at Logistics Lee, hence, right down there, Logistics Lee. So please follow me. I'd like to get to 1,000 followers. I feel like kind of like a loser, like I just can't get that high. So anyway, but I always enjoy our conversations. I think they've been great, and looking forward to talking to you guys again real time soon.
Lee, I'm with you. I always enjoy it. You're one of the best out there. Know what you're talking about.
One of the best.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah,
man.
what are you talking about?
Greg.
He is Logistics Lee.
Man.
Come on, man.
Oh, gosh, I'm going to go hide after this show. My bad, Lee. My bad. Hey, Greg, before we sign off, and folks, I want to officially thank Lee Klaskow, Senior Analyst, Transportation and Logistics at Bloomberg Intelligence, one of our dear friends here. Greg, before we wrap here, What's one favorite thing you heard here today, or one thing folks got to keep their eye on the ball about before we sign off? Your final thought.
Yeah, one thing people need to hear is if they aren't following Lee on X, formerly known as Twitter, they ought to be, because you're following me, and he knows a lot more than I do. So, so follow Lee and get the right answer. That's my suggestion. No, in all seriousness, I think what this enunciates, Lee in particular, I think you help us enunciate how important supply chain is to the broader economy of the world, not just of the U.S. and not just of retail or manufacturing or distribution, but to the supply chain of the world, because everything comes from somewhere and it all lands somewhere. So even the Bloomberg terminal, which if you can afford it, let me assure you, you can't, but if you could afford it, you should have one at home. I would love to have one at home. It's the staple of trading floors, hedge funds, all kinds of financial organizations, banks all over the world. It is the standard for that kind of information. So if you can get yourself one, and when you look at it, when you look at the news in general, you can see how much of it, and especially now since the word is being used, supply chain, you can see how much of it is tied into supply chain. I think this is a great example of that, and I really thank you, Lee, for coming through and setting us straight.
That's right.
Yeah, and I also add to plug my friends at News. They have a daily supply chain newsletter that they put out, and they usually you can get that on Bloomberg.com, and just search supply chain. You should be able to find it. It's one of their newsletters. That's and that's I think it's free if you subscribe to the .com product.
Well said, Lee. Well, speaking of resources, the last couple minutes, tons of resources. And Lee asked, and you shall receive. Michelle says, "Hey, gave you a follow at X, Lee.
There you go.
That that's awesome." The movers and shakers. Just to finish that thought, the movers and shakers out there across the globe. When something happens, first thing they say is, "Where's my Bloomberg terminal?" Is what I'm hearing. So who knows? Maybe we'll be one of those soon and have access. But hey, Greg White, Lee Klaskow. Excellent conversation here today. Thanks for you both, folks. Make sure you connect with Lee and Greg and follow them, send them questions, you name it. Two of the brightest folks I know. Big thanks again, Catherine and Amanda behind the scenes. All of you folks, I know we couldn't hit all of your comments and questions. Thanks for turning out. We got the smartest audience in the globe. And with all that said, hey, do yourself a favor. Take something that Greg or Lee said here today, put it in a headlock, take action. Deeds, not words. And on that note, on behalf of our entire team here at Supply Chain Now, Scott Luton challenging you, do good, give forward, and be the change. And we'll see you next time right back here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.